All right, let's talk about World War II. But we're not going to focus on the usual stories of heroism. Nope. In this explainer, we're cutting right to the bone. We're going to look at the raw, brutal facts and the almost unbelievable cost of a war that literally set the world on fire. So let's just dive right in. You've heard that phrase, war is hell. Well, World War II gave that phrase a whole new, horrifying meaning. This wasn't just armies fighting armies. It was a war against, well, everyone. Civilians, families, humanity itself. And just a heads up, we're not going to pull any punches here. To really get the true cost, you have to look the cruelty right in the face. So where does a nightmare like this even start? Well, it wasn't with some grand single event. It was more like a slow-motion train wreck, a series of bad decisions, and one huge, catastrophic, broken promise. Okay, just look at how fast everything fell apart. It's staggering. In 1938, everyone was terrified of another great war. So European leaders tried to appease Hitler. They gave him a piece of Czechoslovakia, and he promised, swore, that was all he wanted. Of course, he was lying. Less than a year later, his tanks are rolling into Poland. Britain and France, they declare war, but then crickets. They just wait. For months, they do nothing. As Poland is being absolutely crushed, the Allies just sit there. They called it the phony war. But believe me, for the people of Poland, it was all too real. And this wasn't going to be a repeat of World War I's trenches. No, this war was built on something new, something terrifyingly fast and brutally efficient, the machinery of lightning war. The Germans had a name for it, Blitzkrieg, lightning war, and that's exactly what it was. The whole point wasn't just to beat the other army, it was to cause absolute panic, to shatter their will to even fight back. Imagine planes and tanks hitting you all at once, just punching a hole right through your lines. Total chaos. It was designed to overwhelm you before you could even figure out what was going on. And the technology behind it was just terrifyingly efficient. Take the MG-42 machine gun, known as Hitler's buzzsaw. It could spit out 1,200 rounds a minute. That is 20 bullets every single second. And if they ran into a bunker, they'd send in the Goliath, a remote-controlled mini-tank packed with almost 200 pounds of TNT. This was just industrialized murder on a scale no one had ever seen before. So you have this incredibly efficient killing machine, and it was paired with a level of brutality to match. On pretty much every front, the old rules of war, they were just thrown out the window. The line between soldier and civilian, it wasn't just blurred, it was erased on purpose. Then came June 1941. Hitler turns his attention east and launches Operation Barbarossa, the single largest land invasion in all of human history. We're talking 3.6 million German soldiers pouring into the Soviet Union, and what followed was just a new level of savagery. And you have to understand, this wasn't just about winning a battle. It was a war of annihilation. It was fueled by this twisted, racist ideology that viewed the Russian people as subhuman, as inferior. In Hitler's mind, their land was just great real estate. And that belief, that dehumanization, basically gave his soldiers a green light for any and all acts of brutality. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, in the Pacific, a very similar kind of horror was unfolding, also fueled by an ideology of racial superiority. After American and Filipino forces surrendered in the Philippines, around 75,000 of them were forced on what we now call the Bataan Death March. These men were already starving, sick, and they were forced to march over 60 miles in the blistering heat with almost no food or water. The number is just sickening. Nearly 19,000 of them died on that march. They weren't just dying of exhaustion. They were beaten, starved, bayoneted, executed for falling out of line. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, calculated act of pure cruelty. And as horrific as the battlefields were, there was another war happening, a hidden war, one that wasn't fought with tanks and planes, but with paperwork, trains, and cold, calculated logic, a war of total annihilation. The Holocaust, it wasn't some chaotic frenzy. It was a process, a horrifyingly organized, bureaucratic process. Step 1, force Jewish people into overcrowded, walled-off ghettos. Step 2, pack them onto cattle cars and ship them to camps. And Step 3, mass murder. Extermination on an industrial scale in camps designed for one thing and one thing only. Let's just look at one example, the Warsaw Ghetto. Over 350,000 people, Men, women, children, crammed into a tiny part of the city. Disease and starvation were everywhere. And they were all just waiting for the trains. From just that one ghetto, 250,000 people were shipped to just one death camp, Treblinka, where they were murdered. 250,000. Just try to wrap your head around that number. And the most terrifying part? That's just a tiny piece of the whole story. Okay, so as the war finally grinds towards its end, you'd think the horror would lessen. But instead, humanity invented something new, a weapon so powerful it would change the world forever.
So think about it. After years of this global slaughter, how do you even end a war like this? Especially when you're fighting an enemy that has sworn to fight to the very last person. What does it take?
Well, in July of 1945, the Allies gave Japan an ultimatum. It was called the Potsdam Declaration, and it was pretty simple. Surrender, unconditionally, or face prompt and utter destruction. Japan ignored the warning. So, the Allies made good on their threat. August 6th, 1945. A single B-29 bomber flies over the city of Hiroshima. It drops one bomb. And in a single, blinding flash, the city was gone. Tens of thousands died instantly. But it didn't stop there. The fires, the radiation sickness, by the end of the year, the death toll was an estimated 140,000 people. Let me say that again. One bomb, one city, 140,000 dead. Then, 3 days later, it happened again, this time over Nagasaki, and that was the final blow. Even Japan's Emperor Hirohito, when he announced the surrender, called it a new and most cruel bomb. This unimaginable power was what it finally took to end the most destructive war in human history. So we're left with this really heavy question. When you look at everything, the broken promises, the death marches, the gas chambers, the atomic bombs, the price of this war is it's beyond comprehension. It really makes you stop and ask, when a war becomes this total, what does victory even look like? What is the true cost?